The first quarantine was carried out in the 14th century at the Italian port of Dubrovnik, when ships were detained for 40 days at an outport, checked for the plague, and cleared for entry. The word quarantine comes from the Latin words quaranti giorni, meaning 40 days. Quarantine is mainly divided into animal and plant quarantine, depending on the target, and is conducted by the Animal and Plant Quarantine Agency. The purpose of animal quarantine is to protect domestic livestock industries and improve their products by preventing the inflow of malignant livestock diseases, such as the African swine fever, from overseas. The purpose of plant quarantine is to protect the natural ecosystem and agricultural resources by preventing the inflow of foreign plant diseases and pests, such as red imported fire ants, fire blight, and fall armyworm. Let's briefly understand infectious livestock diseases and foreign plant diseases and pests. Livestock disease spreads from one organism to another due to infections by germs and viruses in livestock, such as cattle, pigs, and chickens. It causes financial loss through the death of livestock. In Korea, livestock disease is classified into 3 categories, depending on its risk level, damage level, and the speed of spread. African swine fever, foot and mouth disease, and highly pathogenic avian influenza are high-risk diseases, treated as first-type livestock diseases. African swine fever is a deadly viral disease characterized by hemorrhages and fever. It often spreads during cross-border trade, but a cure or vaccine is yet to be found. Foot and mouth disease is a highly contagious disease that causes blisters and death in young cloven-hooved animals, such as cows, pigs, and sheep. In Korea, it is mandatory to vaccinate animals susceptible to this disease. Highly pathogenic avian influenza is a viral disease that occurs in poultry, such as chicken and ducks, and in wild birds. Though rare, humans may be infected when in close contact with infected birds. An infected person may experience symptoms such as cough, sore throat, and fever above 38 degrees. Quarantine pests are pests that are not distributed in Korea's ecosystem, or those that have the potential to cause major damage to the economy. There are 2,100 species of quarantine pests, which are classified into 70 species of prohibited pests and 2,000 species of managed pests. The influx of infectious livestock diseases and foreign plant diseases and pests has caused tremendous damage at home and abroad. Spain, where the African swine fever broke out causing global concern, spent around 100 billion won from 1986 to 1995 to eradicate the disease. In Russia, more than 800,000 pigs were culled during the 10 years since the 2007 outbreak, incurring an economic loss of 2.2 to 2.4 trillion won. In the African countries of Côte d'Ivoire and Madagascar, where the African swine fever continues to occur, there has been a 30 to 50% decrease in the total number of pigs raised. Specifically, our neighbor China has officially reported 185 cases since its first outbreak on August 3, 2018. It has unofficially culled more than 200 million pigs, which has caused various forms of economic loss, including increased production prices and imports. Furthermore, the African swine fever outbreak that started in China has spread to 11 Asian countries, including Mongolia, Vietnam, Cambodia, North Korea, Myanmar, Laos, the Philippines, Indonesia, and South Korea. Outbreaks have been continuously reported to this day. These livestock diseases have 4 main channels of influx. Those channels include direct contact with infected animals, indirect contact with people, or other pathogen-carrying vehicles, the consumption of virus-contaminated livestock products, such as meat or meat byproducts, and mechanical transmission via rats, birds, and cats inhabiting the infected area. Particularly, infectious livestock diseases can enter through illegally imported livestock products, such as infected animals, raw meat, ham, and sausage, or the clothing and baggage of livestock officials. Diseases that enter in such ways may spread between populations, farms, and regions through various channels. Specifically, the African swine fever is known to remain infectious in refrigerated pork products for at least 15 weeks, and in processed ham and sausage for 3 to 5 months. Hence, regulating the import of livestock from outbreak countries is considered an important preventative measure. Next, let's look at damage cases due to plant diseases and pests. Oriental fruit flies are usually found in China, Taiwan, Japan, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Particularly, Japan's Ryukyu Island incurred 240 billion won in extermination costs. Premature fruit drop occurred due to damages inside fruits, such as citrus and apple, and outbreak of diseases in peach orchards. The second case is the fall armyworm. Fall armyworms are usually found in China, India, Southeast Asia, North America, South America, and Africa. As they are particularly common in China and Africa, they damage corn, sorghum, and the leaves and stems of rice plants. Consequently, crop yields were reduced by 20% in Africa and 5 to 10% in China. Let's look at the domestic damage caused by instances of foreign plant diseases and pests. Fire blight was first discovered in May 2015 at a pear farm in Ansong, Gyeonggi-do, which later spread to the main apple production area in the Cheongbuk region. As of 2019, damages from fire blight occurred in 348 farms in 11 cities and countries, with 69.7 billion won in compensation money. The red imported fire ant was first discovered in September 2017 at a container pier in the port of Busan. Since then, they have been spotted 11 times in 2020, resulting in 900 million won in total extermination costs. Pine wilt nematode first occurred in 1988 at the Gumjeongsan mountain in Dongnae-gu, Busan. Pine trees infected with pine wilt nematode die 100% of the time. As of 2019, a total budget of 1.5 trillion won was spent on controlling pine wilt nematode. We will now look at the inflow path of foreign plant diseases and pests. First, items subject to plant quarantine include grains, such as soybeans and corn, fruits and vegetables, such as mangoes, bananas and cabbages, seedlings and seeds, dried agricultural products, soil or soil-bearing plants, and wood packaging. Items vulnerable to plant diseases and pests, including farming equipment, such as raw stone materials, construction machinery, wooden furniture, and waste paper. It is becoming increasingly likely that items subject to plant quarantine and potential pest and disease-infected items enter the country not only through imported plants, but also through non-plant items, such as containers and ships. To prevent the inflow of livestock diseases and foreign plant diseases and pests, the Animal and Plant Quarantine Agency is enforcing thorough quarantine measures. Items subject to animal quarantine include live animals and their products. In the case that pathogens are not fully destroyed through processes such as sterilization, the items or animals must be quarantined to confirm that they will not spread the disease. Items subject to quarantine include live animals, such as dogs or cats, animal germ cells and embryos, processed egg products, crude or unsterilized milk products, processed meat such as ham, sausage, and bacon, raw hide, fur, feathers, and horns, alongside the containers and packaging for these products. Items subject to plant quarantine include agricultural products such as fruits, vegetables, grains, and herbal medicines, plants for reproduction such as seeds, bulbs, and seedlings, as well as insects and soil or wood packaging materials. Prohibited items include raw fruits and vegetables such as mangoes, apples, and green soybeans, seeds, some fruit seedlings such as grapevines, plants in soil or soil-bearing plants, and live pests. In particular, to prevent the illegal import of quarantined goods through airports or ports in accordance with domestic regulations. A person importing quarantined animals and plant materials must complete a customs declaration form or report verbally to the presiding quarantine officer at the airports or port in accordance with Article 36.1 of the Prevention of Contagious Animal Diseases Act and Article 12.1 of the Plant Protection Act. If violated, a fine of up to 10 million won will be imposed on items subject to animal quarantine, and up to 3 million won on items subject to plant quarantine. If quarantined items are brought into the country inadvertently, they may be reported using the following methods. First, fill out a customs declaration form. When carrying animal and plant quarantine goods upon arrival in Korea, list the possession status of the animal and plant quarantine items on the customs declaration form and submit it. Second, one may report the quarantine items directly to the animal and plant quarantine officers at the airport or port. Third, if it is unclear whether the items are subject to quarantine, voluntary disposal is possible. The quarantined items may be disposed in the disposal boxes placed in the arrival hall of the airport or port. When a traveler reports an item subject to animal quarantine, the quarantine officer conducts a visual inspection and product labeling, and confirms sterilization, sanitation, and processing to confirm whether it meets designated quarantine item standards. The final quarantine inspection will be determined by checking whether there was transit through importable region or import prohibited country. If items excluded from the quarantine certificate have been checked, and if the product has damaged packing, is deteriorated, or is spoiled. The key reasons for failing animal quarantine inspections are when the product was produced in a prohibited area when a quarantine certificate issued by the government agencies of the importing region is missing, or when it is difficult to verify whether the items comply with the sanitary conditions agreed upon between the countries. When reporting items subject to plant quarantine, the quarantine officer should check the quarantine requirements through a spot check. The officer should also conduct a check for disease and pest status, prohibited areas or country of origin, and soil attachment. For items requiring quarantine certificates, confirm that a plant quarantine certificate is attached. For items exempt from attaching a quarantine certificate, ensure that the application has been filed in accordance with quarantine requirements. Additionally, laboratory tests are conducted on plants for planting, such as seedlings, bulbous roots, and seeds. When managed or prohibited pests are detected, they must be disinfected, and if prohibited items are present or a quarantine certificate is not attached, they must be discarded or returned. Major reasons for failing quarantine plant inspections are when raw fruits and other items are brought in that are prohibited due to concerns over the inflow of foreign pests, when there are live pests in the soil or soil-bearing plants, or when a quarantine certificate is missing. To prevent the inflow of livestock diseases and foreign pests and plant diseases through the country's airports and ports, the government has installed quarantine purpose X-rays at major airports and ports to inspect travelers' luggage. Additionally, highly trained quarantine detection dogs prevent illegal livestock imports by screening possible animal and plant quarantine items. The relevant regulations have been strengthened to impose a fine of up to 10 million won on travelers who import designated quarantine items as a carry-on and fail to report them. Foreigners who fail to pay fines may be refused the extension of their stay or be prohibited from re-entry. Next is the quarantine of international mail and items. Recently, material exchange and e-commerce between countries have become more active. Thus, the import of livestock products through international mail is also increasing. If we closely investigate the international mail quarantine procedures, international mail items brought into Korea are classified into 4 categories: EMS, airmail, large packages, and registered airmail. These are classified through the automatic classification system and are loaded onto the transport line. International mail, classified through this system, goes through computer input at the International Postal Logistics Center and is managed there. Quarantine detection dogs search the mail in each transport line to identify disguised quarantine items. Through searches via the customs X-ray, quarantined items are automatically sorted into the quarantine line. They are then opened and quarantined. If an item is rejected, it is returned or discarded. Most common rejections of international mail include pet food and snacks, curries containing beef tallow or beef, and fertilized bird eggs. Plant rejections include raw fruits, such as mangoes, limes, apples, or ripe bananas, raw vegetables, such as red peppers, eggplants, green soybeans, or balsam apples, weed seeds or seeds from prohibited import regions, soil-bearing seedlings, and live insects. What is the penalty for non-compliance in international mail? Restrictions, such as imprisonment or fines, may be imposed in accordance with the relevant regulations. In addition, prohibited items may be returned, discarded, or incinerated. Recently, the purchase of pet food through overseas direct purchase has increased. Is it fine to buy pet food using overseas direct purchase? It is important to remember that pet food is subject to animal quarantine. Since most pet food is manufactured from livestock products, it is essential to check protein feed derived from ruminant animals and the possibility of cross-contamination during the mixing and production processes of bovine spongiform encephalopathy. In Korea, livestock-related personnel are separately managed to prevent the inflow of livestock diseases through humans. Livestock-related personnel must be registered as livestock officials who are engaged in a livestock-related facility. This includes foreign workers and livestock farms. When a livestock official travels or stays in a livestock disease outbreak country, he or she shall report to APQA for disinfection and training. If they do not report to headquarters, they may be fined up to 5 million won. For Koreans, the immigration office will notify them in advance that they are subject to the report. For foreigners, the supervisor will report to the quarantine office. One must receive instructions to fill out a report and receive disinfection and training for baggage and clothing. Departure reports can be conveniently filed by using the Internet, through an in-person visit, by telephone, or by using the departure card provided at the departure gate. Livestock officials must observe the following when visiting other countries. First, refrain from traveling to countries where livestock diseases have occurred. If this was not possible, refrain from visiting farms and livestock markets after returning to Korea. Second, do not bring overseas livestock products into farms. These include beef, pork, chicken, ham, and sausage. Third, wash the clothes that were worn while traveling abroad and take good care of personal hygiene by showering. Finally, refrain from visiting or coming into direct contact with animals as far as possible for 5 days after returning to Korea. In addition, those who work in domestic farms should observe the following protection guidelines. First, when entering a pig farm, change into dedicated shoes for each area and disinfect before entering the building. Second, always close the entrance and exit of the farm and refrain from entering the livestock farm. Third, thoroughly control and disinfect vehicles and people entering and leaving the farm, and ensure that disinfection requirements are observed. Fourth, install and operate fences and bird screens to prevent wild animal intrusion. Fifth, If livestock eat less food or start exhibiting abnormal behavior, please report it to the local and central government. Your interest and careful practice can help create a clean, disease-free Korea. In addition, those who work in domestic farms should observe the following protection guidelines. First, when entering a pig farm, change into dedicated shoes for each area and disinfect before entering the building. Second, always close the entrance and exit of the farm and refrain from entering the livestock farm. Third, thoroughly control and disinfect vehicles and people entering and leaving the farm, and ensure that disinfection requirements are observed. Fourth, install and operate fences and bird screens to prevent wild animal intrusion. Fifth, if livestock eat less food or start exhibiting abnormal behavior, please report it to the local and central government. Your interest and careful practice can help create a clean, disease-free Korea.